The galaxy was a big place, full of strange, powerful species that humans had only recently begun to learn about. But even in this vast, starry ocean, one race stood out. They were the Arthelans, an ancient and proud species known for their intelligence, technological advances, and warrior spirit. They had ruled their corner of the galaxy for centuries, respected by many, feared by most. But everything was changing. The Rakkar, a fierce and terrifying race from a distant star system, had set their eyes on the Arthelan homeworld. The Rakkar were no ordinary invaders. Their ships were massive, built like floating fortresses, brimming with devastating weaponry that could tear planets apart. They had advanced energy weapons, deadly drones, and a fleet that seemed unstoppable. The Arthelans had fought back with everything they had. Their once glorious fleets clashed against the Rakkar in brutal space battles. They threw everything they had into the fight: fighters, warships, and even their most powerful secret weapons. But it was all for nothing. The Rakkar were too powerful. Their ships were too advanced. The Arthelans were losing. And so, in their darkest hour, when defeat was certain, they did something they had never done before. They reached out for help. They sent a desperate message, broadcast across the galaxy, hoping for a miracle. They didn't care who answered. They just needed someone, anyone, to help them survive. The message was simple, yet it carried the weight of a dying species. Attention all beings of the galaxy. This is the Arthelan High Command. Our homeworld is under siege by the Rakkar. We are fighting for our very survival. We need assistance immediately. We are sending out a distress call. Help us, and we will owe you a debt beyond measure. If you do not come, we will fall, and all our knowledge, our culture, our people, will be lost forever. It wasn't a boastful message. There were no demands. There was no pride. It was just a simple plea for help. The Arthelans were offering everything they could, even if they had nothing left to give. They begged the galaxy to save them. For weeks, they waited. And as the Rakkar continued their relentless assault, the Arthelans grew desperate. They could see their cities burning. They could see their people dying. And with each passing day, they knew the end was getting closer. But just as hope seemed lost, the answer came. It was a message, brief and to the point. It came from Earth, a distant and mysterious planet on the edge of the galaxy, home to a species that the Arthelans had never fully understood: humans. We have received your message. We will send help. Stand by, the message said. At first, the Arthelans were confused. Humans? Who were these humans? They had barely even heard of them. Sure, they had detected human ships in the galaxy before, small primitive vessels compared to the mighty fleets of the Arthelans. Humans were nothing compared to the advanced species of the galaxy. Their ships were often little more than clunky metal cans, drifting through space with little coordination or understanding of the greater galactic order. So why would humans send help? The Arthelans were unsure, but they had no other choice but to wait. Days turned into weeks. The Rakkar didn't stop. They were relentless, crushing everything in their path. But finally, a fleet arrived. It wasn't the massive, well-organized, highly advanced fleet the Arthelans had expected. No, instead, it was a small group of ships, outdated, old, and clearly not meant for combat. The Arthelan High Command watched the incoming fleet with confusion and disbelief. Their eyes scanned the ships on their screens. The human fleet was nothing like what they had imagined. These ships were old, very old. Some of them were even falling apart. They looked like they had been abandoned for years and then hastily patched together. One ship, a massive cargo hauler, had several of its outer hull panels missing. Another looked like it had been used as a fishing vessel. Its paint was chipped and peeling, and it seemed to be held together by little more than a few metal beams and bolts. "Is this the help we've been given?" an Arthelan general asked, his voice full of disbelief. The fleet had only a few dozen ships, compared to the thousands of Rakkar warships attacking the planet. The Arthelans felt a chill run down their spines. How could these humans help them? What were they thinking? As the ships got closer, the Arthelan command center went silent. A broadcast came through from one of the human ships. A voice, calm, steady, and completely at ease, came over the comms. "This is Captain Elias Grant, commanding the human fleet. We are here to help. We will do everything we can to fight the Rakhar and save your people." The voice of Captain Grant had no hint of fear or hesitation, but the Arthelans were still skeptical. How could these primitive humans think they could face the Rakhar, a race known for their deadly strength and superior technology? But Captain Grant's words weren't just empty promises. They were the truth. The humans had come to fight, and they had come with everything they had. It might not have been much, but to the Arthelans, it was better than nothing. The human fleet began to move into position, but instead of forming the kind of neat, organized formations the Arthelans expected from a battle-ready fleet, the human ships spread out chaotically. Some ships seemed to be going in different directions, like they had no idea what they were doing. One ship even appeared to be heading straight toward the Rakhar Armada. The Arthelans gasped in horror. "Are they insane?" The Arthelan ambassador muttered, watching as the human ship sped toward certain destruction. But the human fleet didn't stop. They continued to move forward, not with the grand strategies of an experienced galactic force, but with something else, a strange, unpredictable energy that was both terrifying and fascinating to watch. The Arthelan leaders waited, watching closely, unsure of what to expect. They had no idea what these strange humans were planning. But one thing was certain: they were not the kind of force the Arthelans had hoped for. As the human fleet approached the Rakhar forces, something unexpected happened. The Rakhar ships turned their attention toward the humans. The Rakhar's powerful commanders saw the small, outdated ships and thought, "This is no challenge." They laughed at the sight of them, thinking this would be the easiest victory they had ever won. But as the first few shots rang out across space, the Arthelans realized something important. The humans were not just fighting with weapons. They were fighting with something else: ingenuity. The human ships started to deploy strange, unorthodox tactics. They used their old cargo ships as distractions, sending them directly into the path of the Rakhar's mighty warships. These ships, which had no real weaponry, acted as bait, drawing the Rakhar's fire away from the more vulnerable human ships. The humans were using everything they had at their disposal, even if it wasn't much. They didn't have the biggest guns, the strongest shields, or the most powerful fleets. But they had something else that the Rakhar couldn't predict: creativity. And that was just the beginning. The Arthelans had been waiting for weeks. Every day that passed without help, they lost more of their people, more of their cities, and more of their hope. The Rakhar's relentless assault seemed endless. The Arthelan forces, once so mighty, were now on the verge of collapse, and they knew that if no help came soon, their civilization would be wiped out forever. The distress call they had sent out was their last option, the only choice they had left. And when the reply came, it was a mixed bag of emotions. The Arthelans had never truly known who humanity was, and in their desperation, they didn't care much about who answered their call for help. They needed help, any help. But when the message from Earth came through, it wasn't what they expected. "We have received your message. We will send help. Stand by." The words were simple, direct, and to the point. No promises of grand fleets or high-tech weaponry. Just a straight answer. The Arthelans were shocked. Earth, that distant, largely unknown planet on the far edge of the galaxy. Why would humanity answer a call for help? The Arthelans had only recently become aware of humanity. Their ships were small, outdated, and not anywhere near as advanced as the powerful fleets of other galactic species. Compared to the advanced ships of the Rakhar, humanity's vessels were nothing more than rusting cans drifting through space. "Surely they can't be serious," muttered one Arthelan commander as he looked at the message again. "What could they possibly send us?" But there was no time for doubt. The message had been received, and the humans had promised to help. The Arthelans had no choice but to wait and see what came next. And so they did, watching as the hours dragged into days, and the days dragged into weeks, all while the Rakkar continued their assault on the Arthelan homeworld. At first, the Arthelans didn't see any sign of the human fleet. The Rakkar were not slowing down, and the war was becoming more hopeless by the minute. The Arthelans grew anxious. They had trusted the humans to keep their word, but it was hard to believe a species that had barely begun to explore the galaxy could really help them now. The looming destruction of their world was beginning to feel like a certainty. And then it happened. One morning, the skies above their planet lit up. The Arthelan command center quickly went into full alert. They were expecting another assault from the Rakkar. But this was different. The sensors picked up dozens of ships entering their star system. They weren't Rakkar ships. These ships were coming in from a different direction, a direction that the Arthelans had not anticipated. At first, the fleet appeared small, far too small to make a difference against the might of the Rakkar. But then, the Arthelans got a closer look at the ships. Their scanners picked up strange, unidentifiable signatures. These were not ships like anything the Arthelans had seen before. They weren't sleek or powerful-looking like the Arthelan ships. No, these ships were old. Some of them looked downright ancient, barely holding together. The Arthelans exchanged confused glances. "Are those human ships?" one of them asked, his voice filled with disbelief. It was hard to believe, but yes, the ships were coming from Earth, and they were human-made. The Arthelans couldn't understand it. How could humans help them with ships like these? They were nothing like the powerful, modern fleets they had hoped for. They looked like nothing more than a ragtag collection of junk and scrap metal pieced together with little care. The Arthelan ambassador was stunned. "This is what they sent us." A senior general shook his head. "This is madness. These ships are no match for the Rakkar. How could they think this would work?" Despite their doubts, the Arthelans had no choice but to prepare for what was coming. The enemy was on their doorstep, and even these strange human ships were all they had left. They could not afford to dismiss them out of hand. So reluctantly, they watched as the human fleet approached. The ships, small and unorganized, began to move into position above the planet. The Arthelans' command center tried to make sense of what was happening. The human ships were taking strange, erratic paths, moving in ways that seemed illogical, almost reckless. Some ships were heading straight toward the Rakkar fleet, seemingly oblivious to the danger. "Are they insane?" the Arthelan ambassador asked, watching the scene unfold on their screens. "They're heading directly into the fire." But then, just as quickly as they entered the battle zone, the human ships did something unexpected. The ships that had been heading straight toward the Rakkar flagship suddenly veered off course. They didn't just flee. They engaged in what appeared to be a coordinated maneuver. At first, it was hard to understand what they were doing. But as the human ships continued to move, the Arthelans began to realize that there was method in their madness. The humans weren't retreating. They were distracting the Rakkar, pulling them off their planned course. And they weren't just running around aimlessly. Each move was calculated, even if it didn't seem that way at first. The human fleet was maneuvering in a way that made it impossible for the Rakkar to pin them down, and they were using every little thing at their disposal to throw off their enemies. The Arthelans were left watching, stunned, as the human ships didn't fight the way any advanced species would expect. They didn't go straight into battle. They didn't engage in traditional space warfare. Instead, they were using the most basic tactic of all, the element of surprise. "Captain Grant, what are you doing?" one Arthelan officer asked, watching the crazy maneuvers of the human fleet. "This doesn't make sense." But Captain Elias Grant, the commander of the human fleet, was calm as ever. His voice came through on the Arthelans' communication channels, clear and steady. "Just trust me. We'll make it work. Don't underestimate us." The Arthelans didn't know what to make of it. Their greatest minds and warriors were caught off guard by the human tactics. The Rakkar, too, were confused. At first, they laughed. What could these primitive humans possibly do? But they quickly found out. As the human ships continued to move, the Rakkar began to make mistakes. With every crazy, unexpected move the humans made, the Rakkar grew more frustrated. They became disorganized, and their once efficient attack plans fell apart. They couldn't predict the humans' moves, and that chaos was their downfall. The human ships didn't need to be the biggest or the strongest to win. They simply needed to be the most unpredictable. And that's exactly what they were. Back on the Arthelan homeworld, the command center was still buzzing with confusion, but there was a growing sense of hope. The humans weren't as helpless as they had seemed. In fact, they were beginning to turn the tide. Are they winning? One Arthelan general asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. Is this really happening? Yes, replied the ambassador. I think they just might be. The humans were doing the impossible. Against all odds, they were making it work. They were fighting with what they had. No fancy technology, no huge ships, just pure determination, creativity, and something that the Arthelans had never expected from them: heart. The sky over the Arthelan homeworld had turned into a canvas of chaos. Fire from the Rakkar ships lit up the heavens, and the Arthelan forces were barely holding on. Despite their advanced technology and weapons, the Rakkar were just too powerful. For every ship the Arthelans managed to destroy, 5 more seemed to take its place. The planet, once a proud symbol of an advanced ancient civilization, was slowly being torn apart. In their darkest hour, the Arthelan High Command had sent out their desperate plea for help. They had sent the call across the stars, reaching out to every species they could think of. They didn't care who answered. They just needed help, any help. Weeks passed with no response, and the Rakkar continued their attack. The Arthelans thought they were going to lose everything: their homes, their culture, their people. They were resigned to their fate. And then, out of nowhere, a response came. It wasn't a grand message. It wasn't a show of strength or confidence. It was a short, simple reply. We have received your message. We will send help. Stand by. The message came from Earth, a distant planet that was barely known to the Arthelans. They had only detected a few human ships drifting through space over the years, but they had never paid much attention to the humans. The Arthelans knew them only as a primitive species, stuck on a small, insignificant planet on the edge of the galaxy. The message from Earth didn't inspire confidence. It didn't promise the kind of powerful fleet that the Arthelans were hoping for. The Arthelans had been counting on something big, something that could match the Rakkar's terrifying might. But Earth's response was far from reassuring. Still, they were desperate. They had no choice but to wait. Days stretched into weeks, and the Arthelans grew impatient. Every day, their enemies grew stronger, and their defenses grew weaker. The Rakkar were closing in on their planet, and the Arthelans could feel the walls closing around them. They needed help, and they needed it now. Finally, just as hope seemed lost, the first of the human ships appeared. It wasn't much to look at. The human fleet was small, far smaller than the massive armadas of the Rakkar. There were only a handful of ships, none of which were large or intimidating. The Arthelan generals were left speechless as they watched the human ships come into view. These weren't the sleek, futuristic vessels they had expected. These ships were old. Some of them looked like they had been built decades ago and never updated. A few of the ships had hulls that looked like they were rusting away, patched up with makeshift repairs. There were no grand designs, no sleek lines, just simple, utilitarian ships that looked like they were thrown together in a hurry. The Arthelans stared in disbelief. Was this really all humanity could send? The human ships looked like they had come from a different time, a different era. Some of the ships looked like cargo haulers, while others looked like they had been used for scientific research. There was even a ship that looked like an old-fashioned military vessel, complete with the marks of age and wear. "Is this a joke?" muttered one of the Arthalan officers. "This is what we've been given. These ships look like they've been abandoned." Another officer glanced at the screens, trying to make sense of the situation. "These ships, they aren't even built for battle." The human ships, though numerous for their size, didn't look capable of facing the Rakhar's mighty fleet. They were so different from the high-tech, futuristic ships the Arthalans had been hoping for. The human ships looked fragile, almost like they were made from spare parts. There were only a few dozen ships in the human fleet. How could such a small, outdated force help the Arthalans? The Rakhar's fleet was massive, filled with thousands of warships, each one capable of laying waste to entire planets. The Arthalans had sent out a call for help, but the help they were receiving felt like an insult. Still, the Arthalans knew they had no choice but to accept whatever help they could get. They could not afford to be picky. The Rakhar were already at the gates, and they needed something to fight back. So they prepared to face whatever came next. The human fleet moved closer to the battle zone, and the Arthalans nervously awaited the inevitable clash. But as the human ships took up positions, something strange began to happen. The humans weren't just floating there, waiting to be destroyed. No, they were doing something else. Something unexpected. The human ships weren't just sitting ducks. They weren't following the standard tactics that the Arthalans expected. Instead, they were spreading out, each ship heading in a different direction, almost randomly, like they didn't know what they were doing. The Arthalans watched in confusion as the human fleet scattered into chaos. "Are they attacking?" one of the Arthalan generals asked. "This isn't what we expected." At first, it seemed like the humans were acting recklessly, charging straight into the heart of the Rakhar fleet. Some of the ships seemed to be heading directly toward the largest Rakhar warship, while others darted around the battlefield, drawing fire away from the main fleet. The Arthalans watched in horror as the human ships got closer to the enemy lines. "They're going to get destroyed," one of the officers said, shaking his head. "This is madness." But then something unexpected happened. The Rakhar fleet, confident in their overwhelming superiority, began to fire on the human ships. But instead of destroying them, the human ships seemed to dodge the blasts, weaving and twisting in unpredictable patterns. The Rakhar had no idea how to respond. The human ships didn't have the advanced shields of the Arthalans. They didn't have the firepower or the cutting-edge weaponry. But what they did have was something much more valuable: ingenuity. The humans used their smaller size to their advantage. They didn't need to face the Rakhar head-on. They used their speed, their unpredictability, and their desperate determination to stay alive. They were like ants swarming a giant, and with every erratic movement, they threw the Rakhar off their game. The Arthalans watched in disbelief as the human ships made their move. One ship, which had been a cargo hauler just moments before, now served as a distraction, drawing fire away from the rest of the fleet. Another ship, clearly older and more damaged than the others, seemed to be on a suicide mission, charging straight into the heart of the Rakhar formation. But instead of being destroyed, it exploded in a massive burst of energy that took out several enemy ships in the process. The Arthalans didn't know what to make of it. The human ships weren't fighting like any fleet they had ever seen. They were chaotic, unpredictable, and relentless. And somehow, in the middle of this chaos, they were winning. The Rakhar, who had once laughed at the humans, were now beginning to panic. They had no idea how to handle the humans' unconventional tactics. The human ships didn't follow the rules. They didn't fight in straight lines or predictable formations. They fought with something else: their will to survive. The Arthalans had expected a fleet of weak, outdated ships. They had expected an easy defeat, but now they were watching the impossible happen. The Rakhar fleet, which had been so sure of its victory, was starting to fall apart. "Is this real?" an Erthalan commander asked, staring in shock at the unfolding battle. How are they doing this? It was at that moment that the Arthelans realized the true nature of humanity's so-called weakness. It wasn't that humans didn't have powerful ships or advanced technology. It was that they didn't need them. They had something much more powerful: the will to keep fighting, no matter the odds. Even as their ships were being torn apart, the humans kept going. When one ship fell, another took its place. When a pilot was shot down, another human would step up and continue the fight. It didn't matter if they had the best weapons or the fastest ships. They were determined to fight until the very end. The Rakhar, by contrast, were used to winning easily. They had conquered countless planets, wiped out civilizations without a second thought. They relied on their overwhelming power, on their superior weapons, and on their massive fleet. But when faced with the human resolve, they didn't know what to do. The Rakhar ships were huge, their weapons deadly, but they lacked the one thing that the humans had: the drive to never stop. As the battle wore on, the Rakhar began to panic. They had never encountered a species that refused to give in like this. The humans didn't fear them. They didn't hesitate to fight back, even when the odds were stacked against them. They fought with a level of intensity and focus that the Rakhar hadn't expected. And slowly, the tide of the battle began to turn. The Rakhar were confused. They had expected an easy victory. They had expected the humans to fall apart as soon as the battle started. But instead, the humans fought like a swarm, each ship distracting, confusing, and wearing down the enemy. Every time the Rakhar thought they had the upper hand, the humans would strike back in an unpredictable way. The human fleet wasn't made up of giant warships. It wasn't made up of ships that could withstand blows from the most powerful weapons in the galaxy. No, the human fleet was made up of people who refused to give up, no matter the cost. And that made all the difference. One of the Erthalan commanders, watching the battle unfold on the screens, turned to his colleagues with wide eyes. "We've been fighting for power," he said, "for strength. But we've forgotten the most important thing." The ambassador, who had been silent up until that point, nodded slowly. "We've forgotten what it means to truly fight." And in that moment, the Arthelans understood. The true nature of humanity's weakness wasn't weakness at all. It was their strength. They didn't have the largest fleets or the most advanced technology, but they had something far more powerful: a never-ending will to survive. They fought not because they thought they could win easily, but because they refused to lose. The Arthelans watched as the last of the human ships pushed forward, the Rakhar retreating in disarray. It was happening. The Rakhar were losing. The impossible was happening right before their eyes. The true nature of humanity's strength wasn't in their ships, their weapons, or their technology. It was in their spirit, their ability to rise up, even when everything seemed lost. And now, the Rakhar were learning the hard way: never underestimate the power of a species that refuses to give up. The Rakhar fleet was massive, an overwhelming force that seemed unbeatable. For the Erthalans, it had felt like the end was inevitable. Their planet was on the brink of destruction, their defenses crumbling under the weight of the Rakhar's powerful assault. And then, just when all hope seemed lost, the humans arrived, small, outdated, and seemingly helpless. The Arthelans had expected to be saved by a mighty fleet, something that could match the Rakhar's strength and technology. Instead, they had received a few dozen ships, many of which appeared to be barely functional. The humans didn't seem to have the firepower to face the Rakhar's terrifying warships. But what the Arthelans hadn't expected was the humans' unpredictability. The human fleet moved in strange patterns, never sticking to traditional combat strategies. Their ships seemed like they were everywhere at once, darting in and out of the battle, dodging enemy fire, and confusing the Rakhar at every turn. Each ship played its part, no matter how small or damaged, distracting the Rakhar and forcing them to fight on the humans' terms. At first, the Rakhar were overconfident. They couldn't believe that a fleet of such small, outdated ships was actually posing a threat to them. But slowly they began to realize that they were facing something they hadn't accounted determination. As the battle wore on, the Rakar's overconfidence began to shift into frustration. Their superior ships and weapons had been useless against the humans' unpredictable tactics. Every time they tried to focus their fire on one human ship, another would appear, drawing their attention away. The Rakar were no longer in control, and they didn't know how to react. Every instinct in his body screamed to side with Earth. He had fought for humanity, risking his life countless times for the sake of his people. He knew their struggles, their dreams, their fears. He had seen the best and worst of them, and he couldn't ignore their pain or their hope. But the Veltharans, they had power. They had technology and knowledge far beyond anything Earth could even dream of. Queen Isrin had promised peace, protection, and a place in the galaxy's future. For the first time in history, Earth was no longer alone in the vastness of space. If Elias rejected the Queen, the protection would vanish. Earth would be vulnerable once again, and he couldn't bear the thought of that. His thoughts drifted back to the life bond, the connection he now shared with the Queen. It was strong, undeniable, and growing stronger with each passing day. Even though they were far apart physically, he could feel her emotions, her thoughts, reaching him in waves. There were moments when he could almost see through her eyes, experience the world as she did. It was disorienting at times, but it also felt like an overwhelming responsibility, a connection he had never imagined possible. It was as though she had become a part of him. But now, that connection was turning into something more like a chain. It weighed him down, making every decision feel like a matter of life and death. The Queen wanted his loyalty, his obedience, and he couldn't deny that the life bond had a strange pull on his heart. "I am bound to her," Elias whispered to himself, his voice low and steady as he stood alone in the dimly lit chamber. "But I can't betray my people. I can't do it." The door to the room opened behind him, breaking his train of thought. He turned to see a figure silhouetted in the doorway, his closest ally, Commander Leela, a strong and loyal officer who had stood by his side through thick and thin. Her eyes met his with a mixture of concern and determination. "Elias," she said softly, stepping into the room, "I can see it on your face. You're torn." "I'm not sure what to do anymore, Leela," Elias admitted, the weight of his decision pressing heavily on him. "I've been asked to choose between my loyalty to Earth and the Veltharans. Both paths seem impossible." Leela's gaze softened as she stepped closer. "You don't have to make this decision alone. We're all in this together." Elias met her eyes, and for the first time in days, he felt a flicker of hope. "But what if I make the wrong choice? What if I choose Earth, I'm putting all of us in danger?" Leela didn't answer right away. Instead, she placed a hand on his shoulder, offering a silent moment of support. Finally, she spoke, her voice steady and resolute. "Elias, the humans may not see it yet, but they need you. They need someone who believes in them, who trusts that they can find their own way without relying on the Veltharans." Her words stung, but they were also a reminder of everything he had fought for. The Queen's promises of protection and security were tempting, but they came at a high cost. Elias couldn't forget the growing unease among the humans. They didn't trust the Veltharans, and they were right not to. Every alliance, every pact, had a hidden agenda, and this one was no different. "But what if we're not strong enough?" Elias asked, his voice cracking slightly. "What if the Veltharans are the only ones who can protect us from the dangers of space?" Leela's eyes softened, and she stepped back, her expression thoughtful. "We've always been strong, Elias. We've always found a way, no matter how dark things have gotten. You've always believed that, and I still do. The Veltharans may be powerful, but our strength lies in our unity, in humanity's ability to adapt and survive." Elias closed his eyes for a moment, letting her words sink in. Could it be that simple? Had he lost faith in the humans' ability to protect themselves? Was he truly willing to hand over their future to an empire that saw them as nothing more than pawns? The next day, Elias was summoned to the Queen's chamber once more. The moment had arrived. The decision had to be made, and there was no turning back now. When he entered, the Queen was standing by the massive viewport, gazing out at the stars. She turned to face him with that same calm expression, though there was an undeniable edge to her gaze. It was as if she were waiting for him to make his final choice. "Captain Elias," she said, her voice a melodic purr, "have you come to a decision?" Elias felt the weight of her words settle deep in his chest. He could feel the life bond between them, pulling at his very soul, urging him to accept her offer, to remain loyal to the Valtheran Empire. But his thoughts kept drifting back to Earth, to the people who needed him. "I have," Elias said, his voice steady but filled with uncertainty. "I can't betray humanity. I can't betray my people." The Queen's expression hardened, her golden eyes narrowing. For the first time since they had met, there was no warmth in her gaze. "You choose them over me, then. Over the future I offer you. Over the future of all of us." Elias met her gaze, refusing to look away. "I choose Earth. I choose freedom. I choose the future of my people, no matter the cost." There was a long pause. The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Then Queen Isran spoke again, her voice low and dangerous. "You have made your choice, Captain Elias, and now you will face the consequences." For a brief moment, Elias felt a pang of regret, fear of what might happen next. He had made a choice that would change everything, but there was no turning back now. The Queen's words hung in the air like a curse, and he braced himself for the inevitable fallout. "You were a useful ally, Elias," the Queen said, her voice laced with venom. "But now you are a traitor, and traitors are dealt with swiftly." Before Elias could respond, the air in the chamber seemed to grow colder, the temperature dropping dramatically. A deep hum echoed through the room, and suddenly, the walls began to shimmer with an otherworldly energy. The life bond between them flared up, and Elias felt the pull of the Queen's anger. It was like a physical force, a suffocating weight that threatened to crush him. "I have no use for you anymore," she said, her voice a chilling whisper. "You have chosen your fate." In that moment, Elias realized just how dangerous the Queen truly was. He had hoped for peace, for a way to balance his loyalty to humanity with his commitment to the Valtherans, but now he saw the truth. The Queen had never been interested in a partnership. She had only wanted control. And now that he had rejected her, he was her enemy. But even as the Queen's anger swirled around him, Elias felt a flicker of something else, something stronger than fear. He had made his choice. He had chosen humanity. And in doing so, he had found a new strength within himself, a strength that would guide him through the coming storm. "I may be a traitor in your eyes," Elias said, his voice steady, "but I will never betray my people. The war is far from over, Queen Isran, and you may have the power, but you will never have the will of Earth." The Queen's eyes glinted dangerously, and for a moment, Elias thought she might strike him down on the spot. But then her gaze softened, just slightly. "Then the game is not over, Captain," she said quietly. "But you've just made it much more interesting." Elias stepped out of the Queen's chamber, the heavy door closing behind him with a final, echoing thud. His heart pounded in his chest, but there was no time to dwell on the weight of the Queen's words or the threat that had hung in the air like a dark cloud. The decision had been made. He had chosen Earth, his people, and now there was no turning back. But Elias wasn't afraid. He felt something else: determination. As he walked through the hallways of the Valtheran ship, the alien architecture seemed to loom over him, cold and intimidating. The ship's corridors stretched endlessly in every direction, vast and seemingly endless, like a maze of metal and energy. Yet Elias moved forward with purpose. He knew he had to act fast. There wasn't a moment to lose. The Queen may have had the power to crush him, But he had something far stronger: the unwavering will of Earth. Elias wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the future of humanity. The humans didn't understand what was truly at stake. They were still divided, uncertain of their place in the galaxy. But Elias had seen enough, had learned enough. Humanity's strength wasn't just in their technology or their military might. It was in their unity, in their shared belief that they had the right to determine their own future. And now he had to make sure they didn't lose that. Back on Earth, things were starting to unravel. The tension between the Veltherans and the humans had reached a boiling point. The fear of being controlled by an alien empire was beginning to seep into every conversation. Whispers spread through the government, the military, and the general population. There were those who believed that Earth had to sever ties with the Veltherans before it was too late, that the humans should stand alone, free from any external control. Elias knew that this fear could destroy everything. The Veltherans had promised protection, but it was clear now that those promises came with strings attached. The Queen had shown her true colors, and Elias couldn't allow her to use humanity as a pawn in her game. The humans had to realize that their real strength lay in their ability to stand together, not in relying on the whims of an alien empire. But Elias and his allies were prepared. They had spent weeks building new weapons, new strategies, and most importantly, they had the support of the entire planet. The Veltherans were about to learn a powerful lesson. Humanity would not be controlled. The battle that followed was one of the most intense and brutal conflicts in history. The Veltherans came with all their might, their ships blazing with advanced weapons and technology. But the humans fought back with everything they had: fighters that darted through the skies, explosive weapons that shook the ground, and a unified determination that nothing could break. Elias stood in the heart of the battle, commanding the resistance forces. His heart was filled with fire as he watched Earth's forces strike back, proving to the universe that humanity was not weak, not to be manipulated, and not to be controlled. As the battle raged on, Elias could feel the energy of humanity pulsing through every strike, every move. The Veltherans, despite their technological advantage, could not match the fierce spirit of the humans. They underestimated the one thing the Veltherans could never replicate: humanity's will. In the end, the resistance triumphed. The Veltheran fleet was forced to retreat, their ships damaged and scattered. The battle was over, and Earth had won. The Queen's dream of controlling humanity was shattered, and a new era had begun. He needed to unite Earth's leaders and military, to show them that they didn't need to fear the Veltherans. They had the power to protect themselves. Elias had to remind them of that, even if it meant facing the anger of the Veltherans. The first step was to make contact with the Earth's leaders. Elias had spent years working alongside the world's top officials, but this was different. He had seen the fear in their eyes, and now he would have to show them a path forward. He would need their support, their trust. He arranged a secret meeting with the highest-ranking officials of the Earth Defense Force. These were the leaders of the planet's most powerful military organizations, the ones who had resisted the idea of the Veltheran alliance from the beginning. They had always believed that humanity needed to be self-reliant, and they feared that the Veltherans would eventually take control. Now, with the Queen's true intentions revealed, Elias needed them more than ever. When he entered the secure briefing room, all eyes turned to him. There was no need for formal introductions. These men and women knew him well. He had fought alongside them, bled alongside them. But today, he wasn't just Elias the soldier. Today, he was Captain Elias of the Resistance. Captain. General Hammond, the head of Earth's military, said with a firm voice, "We've been expecting you." Elias nodded, but there was no time for pleasantries. He took a deep breath and stepped forward, his voice calm but filled with determination. The Veltherans can't be trusted. Queen Isren's plan for humanity is clear now. We've been pawns in her game. If we don't act fast, we will lose everything. A murmur rippled through the room. Some of the officers exchanged looks. Others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. General Hammond raised a hand to silence the room. "Elias, we know about the Queen's manipulation," he said, his voice steady. "But what can we do? The Veltharans have far more resources, far more power than we do. If we challenge them, we'll be wiped out before we even have a chance to fight." Elias met the general's gaze, his heart steady but his mind racing. He had thought about this moment for weeks, planned it carefully. "I've seen the strength of humanity. I've seen how we fight for each other, for what we believe in. The Veltharans may have advanced technology, but we have something far more valuable: our unity. We don't need their protection. We never did." The room was silent. No one spoke for a long time. Then, one by one, the officials began to nod. It wasn't just Elias speaking. It was their own doubts, their own fears about relying too heavily on an alien empire, that had finally convinced them. "We'll need to rally the people, get them on our side," General Hammond said, his voice now full of resolve. "But if we move fast, we might just have a chance." With the military leadership behind him, Elias turned his attention to the next challenge: uniting the general population. The fear of the Veltharans was deeply ingrained in the public. Many still believed that their only hope for survival lay in their alliance with the alien empire. Elias had to change that belief, and he knew exactly how to do it. The media was one of the most powerful tools at his disposal. He couldn't directly confront the Queen or the Veltharans, at least not yet, but he could control the message, and he could rally humanity. Elias worked with key media outlets, urging them to spread the truth about the Queen's betrayal. He revealed the secrets of the Veltharan Empire, showing the people of Earth what had really been happening behind closed doors. It wasn't an easy task. Many outlets were hesitant to publish such a controversial story, but Elias's connections and the growing resistance in the military gave him the leverage he needed. As the news spread, people began to wake up to the truth. They saw the danger that the Veltharans posed to their freedom. The alliance had never been about mutual respect. It had been about control. And now, Earth had to decide whether it would stand up for itself or fall under the shadow of an alien empire. The resistance grew stronger every day. More and more humans joined the movement, refusing to bow to the Veltharans. The military, the scientists, and the citizens of Earth were united, standing together against a common enemy. The tides were turning. Then came the day when the Veltharans finally responded. Queen Isren's forces arrived at Earth's orbit, a vast fleet of ships that stretched across the sky like a storm of metal and energy. They were ready to crush the resistance, to silence those who dared defy the Empire.